Waverly Hills Sanatorium, located just outside Louisville, Kentucky, has long been known for its eerie history and dark secrets. In 2003, a man named Lucas Hargrave moved into a nearby farmhouse with his wife, Jennifer. They were drawn to the area by its peacefulness, unaware of the sinister energy that lurked in the shadows. Over time, their quiet, rural life would soon turn into a nightmare. It started subtly. Late at night, Jennifer would wake up to the sound of footsteps in the hallway, followed by whispers she couldn't make out. Lucas, dismissing it as old house creaks or raccoons on the roof, didn't think much of it. But as days passed, the sounds became more distinct, like the echo of soft, dragging footsteps, always late at night. The couple began to avoid the upper floor of the house where the noises were loudest. One evening, as Lucas came back from town, he noticed something unusual. The front door was slightly ajar, though they had both been inside all day. A faint odor of rotting wood and mildew filled the air, but the house was still. Jennifer was nowhere to be found, and the only sound was the faint echo of breathing, not her own. Panic gripped Lucas as he ran upstairs, calling her name. Her phone was on the bed, her coat still hanging by the door, but she was gone. Frantic, Lucas called the police, but despite an extensive search, there were no signs of Jennifer. No neighbors had seen her leave, and the house showed no signs of forced entry. The officers initially suspected a mental health issue, perhaps a sudden breakdown, but Lucas knew something was terribly wrong. This wasn't just a disappearance, something malevolent was at play. As weeks went by, Lucas became consumed by fear. He began to research the history of the house, hoping to find some explanation for the strange occurrences. That's when he discovered the chilling details of the land's past. The property had once been part of Waverly Hills, a tuberculosis sanatorium notorious for its inhumane treatments and numerous deaths. The facility had been closed in the 1960s, but rumors of its haunted past persisted. Legends spoke of patients who died in agony, their souls unable to find rest. In desperation, Lucas sought the help of a paranormal investigator. The investigator, an experienced medium named Abigail, agreed to visit the house. Upon her arrival, she immediately felt a heavy presence in the air. She could barely speak, her eyes wide in terror, but she whispered, "The spirits here are restless, and they hunger for the living." She spoke of the tragic souls trapped in the sanatorium, vengeful and angry. Abigail warned Lucas that Jennifer's disappearance was no accident. She had been taken by a malevolent force, one tied to the tortured souls that once inhabited the sanatorium. Days later, Lucas heard the footsteps again, louder this time, accompanied by whispers that seemed to be calling his name. The air grew cold, and the house seemed to come alive with the echoes of voices. Desperate, Lucas locked himself in the basement, but the sound of dragging feet moved closer, stopping just outside the door. He could hear Jennifer's voice now, faint but unmistakable. "Lucas, help me, they're coming for you too." But when he opened the door, there was no one, just the lingering smell of decay. The following night, Lucas was startled awake by the feeling of cold fingers brushing against his neck. He turned to see Jennifer standing by the bed, her face pale and her eyes hollow. She spoke in a voice that wasn't her own. "You should never have come here." Before he could respond, she vanished, leaving behind only the sound of dragging footsteps that echoed down the hall. In the days that followed, the house seemed to take on a life of its own. The furniture moved by itself, objects would fly across the room, and the sound of chains dragging on the wooden floors was heard at all hours. Lucas, now broken and paranoid, could no longer distinguish between his own sanity and the horror surrounding him. He attempted to call the police once more, but every time they arrived, the house was perfectly still. As if nothing had ever happened, no one could help him. No one could hear the screams or the dragging footsteps. The final straw came one night when Lucas found himself standing at the base of the stairs, staring up at the top floor. The shadow of a figure moved behind the railing, and the unmistakable voice of Jennifer echoed down, "Join me, Lucas." With his heart pounding in his chest, he took a step forward, the ground beneath him cold and unyielding. He stepped into the darkness, but when he reached the top of the stairs, the house fell silent. The police arrived the next morning to find the house empty, the front door wide open, but there was no sign of Lucas. The officers searched the entire property, but it was as though he had vanished without a trace, just like Jennifer. The eerie sounds, the dragging footsteps, and the whispers all stopped the moment they entered. The house was as quiet as it had ever been, but those who dared to enter still spoke of the haunting echo of Lucas's final words. they're coming for you too. To this day, no one knows what happened to Lucas and Jennifer. Some say they were taken by the restless souls of Waverly Hills, while others believe something darker still roams the grounds. The police never solved the case, and the house still stands, abandoned and forgotten by most. But if you listen closely at night, you can still hear the dragging footsteps, and sometimes, just sometimes, the echo of a name. In the quiet town of Stillwater, Oklahoma, there was a house that nobody dared approach after dusk. It had stood on the edge of town for decades, and although it appeared like any other home during the day, it was at night that it took on an unsettling aura. The locals knew it as the Brown House after Olivia Brown, the woman who had disappeared there one cold November evening in 1997. Olivia, a 28-year-old schoolteacher, was beloved in the small community for her kindness and gentle demeanor. She had moved to Stillwater a few years before her disappearance and had rented the old house on the outskirts of town. It wasn't long before the rumors began to swirl. At first, it was whispered that the house had a strange history tied to a dark event that occurred many years ago. No one knew the details, but everyone agreed it was better left unexplored. One evening, Olivia stayed after school to finish grading papers, as she often did. When she finally arrived home, her neighbors saw her walk to the front door, but that was the last time anyone saw her. The next morning, her car was still parked outside, but there were no signs of Olivia. Her lights were on, and the door was unlocked. The police were called to investigate, but when they arrived, the house appeared completely normal, except for one chilling detail. There was an overwhelming smell of something rotting in the air. The police conducted a search of the property, knocking on doors and asking neighbors, but no one had seen anything suspicious. No signs of forced entry or struggle could be found. The interior of the house was quiet and undisturbed, but there was an eerie sense of abandonment. The windows were all covered with heavy curtains, and dust had settled on the furniture, as if no one had been living there for days. Still, there were no answers. Weeks went by, and the investigation hit a dead end. No evidence surfaced, and Olivia's disappearance was ruled a cold case. However, things began to get even stranger. People who lived near the house started to experience strange occurrences at night. One neighbor, a woman named Mrs. Jenkins, reported hearing faint cries echoing from the house late at night, but when she checked, there was no one around. Another neighbor swore she saw shadowy figures moving behind the curtains, but when she approached the house, the curtains were drawn tight and nothing seemed amiss. Then, a year later, the first strange incident occurred. A group of teenagers dared each other to enter the house after hearing the stories about Olivia. They snuck inside at midnight, flashing their flashlights over the cobwebs and peeling wallpaper. As they explored the upstairs bedrooms, one of them, a girl named Hannah, stumbled upon something strange. A set of old photographs, yellowed with age, scattered on the floor. They appeared to be pictures of a family from the early 1900s, except there was one disturbing detail. In each photograph, a shadowy figure loomed in the background, its face blurred and contorted, as if it were not meant to be seen. The group quickly left the house, but not before hearing something that sent them running in terror. From the basement, they heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, pacing back and forth. They fled without looking back, but when they returned to the safety of their homes, they discovered something horrifying. Each of them had a strange burned mark on their arms, shaped like a handprint. It was as though something had touched them in the darkness. After that incident, the town's curiosity about the house only deepened, but no one had the courage to go inside again. The police, who had long since stopped investigating Olivia's disappearance, dismissed the strange reports as local superstition. But there was one officer, Officer Blake, who couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. He decided to go to the house one evening, alone. As Blake entered the house, he was hit with the same overwhelming smell of decay. He carefully ascended the stairs, his flashlight shaking in his hand. At the top of the stairs, he found a door slightly ajar. Inside, the room was dim and a large mirror hung on the wall. When Blake stepped closer, he froze. In the reflection of the mirror, he saw Olivia, her face pale and eyes wide with terror. She was mouthing something, her lips trembling, but no sound escaped. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind him and Blake was plunged into darkness. The officers who found Blake the next morning described him as being in a state of shock. mumbling incoherently about what he had seen in the mirror. His uniform was torn, and his face was ashen, but the most disturbing detail was his hands. They were burned, the same shape as the handprint seen on the teenagers. Blake couldn't recall anything after seeing Olivia's face in the mirror, but his demeanor was never the same again. The house was finally condemned and boarded up, but even after years of disuse, it still stands as a silent reminder of the horrors that took place inside. Some say Olivia's spirit still lingers there, trapped between worlds, while others believe that something darker resides within the house, something that feeds on the living. To this day, no one knows what happened to Olivia Brown. The police could never find any trace of her, and her disappearance remains unsolved. The house is left to rot, its windows watching, always waiting. And though the town of Stillwater has moved on, the stories remain. At night, if you listen closely, you can still hear the faint sound of someone whispering her name from the darkness inside. And some say, if you listen long enough, you'll hear the footsteps, slow and deliberate, pacing back and forth in the dark.